Hey everybody, welcome to, wow, I'm so close. We're just going to back out of that. Welcome to episode number 20 of Tactical Crouch. It is a podcast about competitive Overwatch. Of course, we've got the regular badasses of competitive Overwatch analysis in Joe and Volamel. Bringing on a special guest, though, from the currently at the Philadelphia Fusion team house here. Rambunctious bunch. I'm gonna be using that mute a lot, I can tell already. But we've got the assistant coach for the Philadelphia Fusion coming off of a 2-0 week in week one. None other than ChrisTFer. Hey man, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking the time to come out and learn us some Overwatch this week.
Thank you for having me.
We have a lot to talk about. Obviously, week one is in the books when it comes to competitive Overwatch or Overwatch League season 2. A lot of people already getting really cocky about their picks. So, I mean, I can't wait. Yiska, we're going to be doing a knee-jerk reaction segment later on, and I can't wait to hear what your knee-jerk reactions are from week one. I've got some good ones. It should be a good time. So before we get started, though, let's just do the housekeeping things. Let's just get it all out of the way. First of all, thank you all for your support of the show. So if you want to support the show, obviously download it, listen to it, whatever. It's on all your podcast feeds. It's on YouTube. It's on Spotify. It's everywhere. And if you comment on the show in some place that's not, I will put it up there. So thank you for all that, as well as the new subs in YouTube or on YouTube, of course, but also on Twitch. We really appreciate that as well. You can find it everywhere. We've got ChrisTFer on the show. We're bringing on awesome guests, just like 5 weeks in a row of awesome guest Joe. Joe's typing. He's
what?
looking. Oh my
What'd I
God.
do?
Just not paid attention.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just not ready for it at all. I'm just saying, we've had really good guests on recently.
Yeah, it's been sick. You know, we had Sideshow. ChrisTFer's here to talk us some Philly and how successful they're doing. And we're gonna learn about some the differences between the GOATs and the contenders teams. So we'll see what the differences are. I know there was a fairly popular demand, surprisingly enough, you know, after ChrisTFer had said a few things in some discords, I was immediately linked screenshots, and to be honest, I don't necessarily disagree, but I think we're going to get some clarification and some nuance to the statement. So it'll be interesting.
It will be interesting. Lots going on. Let's talk about last week though first, Joe. We, I mean, anyone can go to the Overwatch League website and look at the, who won and who lost. But we need to talk about something. There's an elephant in the room here. That's that London started off the season at 0-2, and you were the only analyst on the show during the time to say that that's going to happen. You get a victory lap here.
Yeah.
So in your mind, before we talk about, or before we talk to ChrisTFer, because obviously they were one of the teams that took him down. Why do you think London did so poorly in week one?
I mean, I'm gonna parrot the same things I said last week. Unfortunately, they're slow to adapt. They're not necessarily. They haven't been keen throughout at least this first season, and at the start of the second season, how quickly they've developed into the new meta games has been incredibly slow. To kind of branch off of that, though, they haven't really brought in anybody that's had like some very in-depth experience with this specific metagame. If we look back, people are going to instantly draw comparisons to Guard, but if you remember, Guard really only played during the heavy Sombra meta of Contender Season 1. Korea didn't really transition over heavily until late into Season 1, early Season 2. Like, that's when things really built up inside of the GOATS meta for them. And again, they've been a little bit behind the ball. And again, London's been slow. I do think they'll pick up the pace. I think now that they have a good breadth of information that's not just scrims this, scrims that, I do think teams take that into consideration. They have official matches to study. They have, homework to be done, and I think they will bounce back, but I could be still a little bit bullish on them due to their season one performance and the peaks that they could reach. Is DPS or multi DPS compositions that important? I'm not entirely too sure just yet. It could be a late week 5 power spike that way, but I'm not entirely too sure. It could be that DPS are strong early, Ghost is going to last the entirety of stage 1, be the composition that people always default back to. We'll see. But yeah, London's slow. London doesn't adapt quickly. They're gonna take some early losses. They're gonna drop games throughout stage 1, stage 2. If we do see Ghosts, I think they'll probably even out a little bit more.
ChrisTFer, I want to talk to you a little bit because you obviously opened up the season with that grand finals rematch. How important was it to kind of get the revenge in that series? And 2, like, what can you tell us about how you prepared or how you were able to kind of exploit London in that season opener?
Yeah, I mean, I myself, it wasn't necessarily revenge because I wasn't here last season, but I know the players eyed this fixture up probably out of all the stage 1 games as we wanted to win. So I think we prepped pretty hard for it. I mean, it's difficult. Like the first game of the week, we don't have any intel about what they're playing. We obviously don't scrim them a single time. Like we just go into it blind. So the first week is just we play our game and hope that it's better than what they bring. Whereas for the rest of the games, at least we'll have something to base our prep work off. I think it went fine. I think London had a really tough first week. I think us and Paris is a pretty rough schedule. Maybe they aren't as bad as quite as many people say they will be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Yiska, that kind of comes down to, I think, one of the first knee-jerk reactions. We obviously all had London in the top 2 when we did our kind of preseason power rankings. I made a joke to Benchmob today on Twitter, and I said I already adjusted London to 19th because they're they're 0-2, so therefore they're not very good. But is this to you something that you're worried about for London, or is this kind of expected at this point?
Purple extended.
It is expected, but if you keep last season in mind, it is a little bit worrying because I don't see them becoming drastically better, and I don't see the meta changing. So stage 1 might be dire for them. And then last season, with a performance like that during stage 1, they wouldn't have even made playoffs realistically. So it just makes complete sense. If you have a team that basically were world beaters on the back of just being pound for pound, I still argue the best team in the league, then of course a meta that suppresses that and is so much about internal coherence, which honestly they have never really excelled at. It makes perfect sense that they are where they are right now in terms of the standings.
That hindsight, though, so 2020. I love it. ChrisTFer, actually, I need to say something really quick. We'll cut the show here for a second. I think that it's actually on your webcam mic and not your headset mic.
Oh God. Okay. Let me sort that real quick.
No worries. I'm just like, wait, it's not coming through that headset. There's no way.
That would make sense, actually. Let's see. Input device. Yeah, okay.
Don't worry, chat. We got it.
Okay, how about now?
Oh my God, it's so good.
Okay. That's a rookie error.
Oh, it's so good. All right.
You probably won't be able to hear Elk anymore either. So all good.
Part of it was hilarious, and I'm like, there's no way. There's just no way. All right. Neptuno said he was trying to tell you.
He was. I don't know why he was trying to interrupt me during a podcast, to be fair, but I guess
got him. All right. So, audio listeners, sorry about that, but we're going clean the rest of the way. It's gonna be good.
It's all good now.
Yeah, we're all good now. Let's go. Saved, done. You're Neptuno. You're sexy, says Asuka 912. No disagreements here. Okay, so London, we kind of talked about there. I mean, I do want to ask you, ChrisTFer, about the Atlanta Reign here. So I think that there's been, that went to a map 5.
Yeah.
It looked pretty close on both ends of the
Couldn't
things.
have got much closer, really.
Yeah. Did you expect that match to be that close? Do you feel like there was maybe some underrating of Atlanta, or was a lot of
Yeah.
it preparing for London as well?
So I think the problem we had was we watched Atlanta's match versus Florida, but it felt like a lot of the reasons they were winning weren't necessarily them playing well, but like Florida were making like so many mistakes, right? So it was really hard to get like a good gauge of how good Atlanta were. But I think that we realized maybe between like the last day before we played them that this might actually end up being a tougher game than the London. Whereas obviously before the season we expected London was going to be the tough game, and then Atlanta in theory should have been easier.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it was close. I didn't get to see any Atlanta games in full yet. Those are two of the games that I missed from this last week. But what was your take on Atlanta this week, Joe?
So far, so good. I've been pretty high on Urster. I think towards Ilios, map 5, for those of you who haven't caught up, Urster looked quite good. Had a couple pretty decent performances there. Dogman actually surprised me quite a bit. DeFran has come out swinging into a season where I did have some question marks on how consistent he was going to be. It has definitely exceeded my expectations on what I considered possible for somebody who was very much kind of a pre-Overwatch League era superstar, and kind of, had some hardship and has come back and looking stronger than ever. One person that kind of has stuck out like a sore thumb, though, is Masa. I do believe that Lucio's really dictated at least the fourth day of week 1, and he was another one of these standout Lucios. I can't imagine sitting in the coaching booth in the dugout and looking at him just running around and causing such a problem for Carpe. So kudos to him. He definitely is put a lot of answered a lot of questions, has stamped his place in the Overwatch League, and I think he's going to do very well for himself.
Yiska, let's talk about Boston really quick. So Boston turned some heads, call up Fusions as a main tank, and he makes a pretty big splash. I want to hear your thoughts, because they go in week 1 alone, and let me just make sure I get this right. They go 2-1 against NYXL, which nobody expected them to win, I would say, and then against Houston Outlaws, beat them on map 5, which I read your article about Houston Outlaws and map 5s. It's basically written in stone at that point. Take Houston to map 5, you're in a good spot. So what's your take on Boston so far? Should people be trending them up the rankings now that they're adding Fusions as that main take and Gamsu's out?
Well, I almost, at first I thought just assembling European players was sort of like, collecting Exodia and just, in this meta. But I think Dream argued it to me very well, that it is basically mostly main tank positions. If you're like a main tank that is comfortable in GOAT's meta and is also vocal and can then, guide the team, then this is almost a hard carry position that we currently have. And in very different metrics than we usually think of in hard carry situations. It's not based on mechanics as much, or much at all. But yeah, I think the pickup is very interesting. I'm also not sure if he's what his contract structure is, if he is a two-way or if he just straight up was moved up, because we have to assume that once they have color hikes black, that Axiom is moving back into the main point position, maybe not during the GOATS meta. Then we have to ask what happens after that. And of course, I think you're only allowed to play 2 matches per stage anyway. So if he plays more, then he's automatically promoted to be an Overwatch League player. It's quite interesting what the dynamics here are at play for Boston, what their decision making will be coming into the next week and then thereafter.
ChrisTFer, what was your take on the Boston Uprising? Like, do you think that the community overall is underrating Boston? I mean, I would say on average they kind of sit in that upper to middle, lower half, kind of, anywhere between like the 13 to the 17 is where they kind of seem to settle. Do you feel like that's pretty fair for that team, or do you think that they show that they're a team that can definitely punch above that weight, a la season 1?
I'm not sure. I think that my internal power rankings had them in a pretty similar position to what most people did. I think stage 1 is probably going to be their most favorable meta. You could argue that their DPS is their weak positions, and I think that this meta, it's easy if you have like team players in DPS positions, you can be just fine. Like obviously Fusion's UK main tank, like on stage, and he understands GOAT so well, like that's obviously going to be a really big factor. And I agree, I think it'll be really interesting to see if he's done enough in first week to secure himself the starting spot. Because I get the impression before this Gamsu and then the Color Hex ban situation that like he probably wasn't going to be with the team like as a starting player, and then maybe sub them in as an emergency just for the first week. But I mean, it's going to be hard to argue against starting them next week, right?
I mean, you can maybe make an argument for Axiom because he's picked up on Zarya so quickly, but that doesn't necessarily translate into main tank and how that works with GOATs and how understanded, Fusions is at knowing and kind of studying GOATs as he's been with, the British Hurricane and whatnot. The kid came on stage with nerves of steel. Like he's making these ballsy Reinhardt calls, and some of them hit and some of them didn't, and that's fine. But overall, I think he's incredibly vocal. Like no shade here, no leaks, but I've heard some British Hurricane scrims, and he's a very loud player.
Yeah.
Like he's very vocal. Somebody who I think that does a lot of leading for that team, and again, you can kind of see it. He leads the charge. He is that spearhead, and I'd be sad if Boston actually subbed him out for Axiom and put him over.
Wouldn't surprise me if there was a situation where the players straight up say it's so much easier to play with Fusions than Axiom, just because the nature that a player who's happy to call every aggressive move, who's like able to lead, like to carry 95% of the comms, makes your life so much easier to play with. So I imagine that his players probably love playing with him, especially on stage.
Yeah, and Joe, I've heard the same thing, that Fusions understands GOATs really well, arguably maybe the best on the entire like Uprising roster, and he is very vocal about it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's one thing to have a main tank who understands GOATs, and then also one who's a very vocal main tank. Sounds like this might be a stage in a meta that might really, really suit them. Even though they had a really difficult stage 1, they were still outclassed by NYXL. They were narrowly outclassed by the Houston Outlaws, who...
Did they not win versus Outlaws?
Oh, sorry. They narrowly outclassed Houston Outlaws. Sorry. My bad. I suck at speaking. I probably shouldn't do it into a microphone so much. But like Boston for me, I was really impressed. And again, I love a team that punches above their weight. And this seems like a team that, at least in week 1, even if they come out of it 1-1 and almost lose. All right, bye. See you later. There, he's back. We'll get him back in a second. Even if it is a 1-1 week, they're hello, welcome back.
It's all good.
Welcome back. Yeah, I don't know. I was like, overall, I was really pleased with Boston. It doesn't change my rankings yet, but Fusions at the very least is go okay. Like, not saying losing Gamsu makes a ton of sense, but he's filling the shoes right now.
Definitely 100%.
By the way, also good on Huck. That wasn't like a reactionary pickup after the World Cup performance. He was signed before that.
Yeah, he was.
Mm-hmm. Very good scouting.
Yeah, and that again, I've been very hesitant to buy any kind of Uprising stock, but it looks good. I can't hate it.
Bookmarked.
It plays into the narrative. The system seems to be working thus far. Again, I'm still yet to be completely sold, but some early projections. I may be writing a Boston article praising their scouting, because again, the system it can't not work. You know what I mean? They're buying
it's hinged
these
on
players.
The whole thing, yeah.
Exactly. It always goes back to the system. And if that's, Huck's passion project and he's kind of crafted this model where he can evaluate players, or if he's got people who can do that, he's doing the best job out there, at least for the Western talent.
Yeah.
It's also like one aspect that I might have underappreciated or undervalued is if you look at the grand history of Overwatch, there actually never have been players that have been absolute top of the game for 2 years in a row. Of course, the game is not that old, but at the same time, it doesn't seem to be very robust in the top player department. So him selling off that type of talent, especially why this, first generation, second generation player diminishing return is still sort of in full effect, because as we know from other esports games, these first generation, second generation pro players are phased out rather quickly. Then third and fourth may have longer careers. But selling off the first and second generation pro players while they still command these buyout fees might be just a perfect read on the current market situation.
Mm-hmm. It seems like he has a good read. When GOATS was starting to rise up, I think a lot of people had their eyes on a lot of the Hurricane players, a lot of the EU players. Whether or not they were signed, that remains to be seen. I think that's a lot of depending on the organization. But, I think the eyes were there. It seems like not as many people as I would have liked pulled the trigger and, brought people in like ChrisTFer, like, other coaches that have at least some experience, like the Runaway players, some of the Spark coaches, some of the Spark players that have that experience, bringing them in. And taking bits and pieces from them. Like, for instance, let's say Elk, right? He has experience playing in contenders, playing against GOATs, beating GOATs without using GOATs. You know what I mean? Like, he has that understanding that an Overwatch League player just isn't going to have, just by the basis and just the factual nature of contenders and how the patch cycles work and how quickly they have to adapt to it, because at the end of the day, they want jobs. And if you want jobs, you have to do well in contenders. You have to kind of show your worth. And the best way you're going to do that is if your team does well. So you all are studying, you all are practicing, at least ideally, right? And of course, you have your outliers. But, bringing those people in, I think it's been major boons to a lot of these teams that have done so, at least.
I will also say there are major similarities for me between Fusion and Boston in that regard, because both of them have really solid academy systems. The difference being that Boston tends to sell off their players. There's also promotion going on. We have to acknowledge that. That is also going on in Fusion. But basically, it seems like these two organizations almost have the best take on scouting and developing talents, while Fusion likes to keep those players for a longer period of time. It's for Boston, they sell them off and share the goods across the league. I think in that regard, I think these two organizations have figured the academy system out the most, depending on what your goal actually is, because there's no doubt that Fusion University is the most dominating or dominant contenders team in their region anywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to move on and talk about the Titans really quick, because the Titans, I mean, man, I don't want to, and this is something that I really struggled with in the beginning here, is I didn't want to overvalue the Titans, but they looked really good. I mean, Twilight probably hit one too many discorded headshots before Bumper could even dive in, so it's kind of like, because even when they were playing against Shanghai, they're playing against double poke, and when you're playing against double poke and you're running monkey goats, it's kind of it's tough to get that second poke, right? Because monkey can only go to one of the pokes, but when that other poke is at 25% health from those Twilight headshots, it's just a little, I can't tell. I don't want to ride too high, but man, the Titans looked decisive, Joe.
Yeah, no, They sit at the top of my stage 1 power rankings for a reason. I think they're coming in. They are a pre-built team. This is not a team that you had to build, coming into it, which again, I still think has some value. I do think I'm at least not entirely too sold on how successful that will be in the long run over Overwatch's history, but there's evidence to prove that building a team is just as good, if not better, than just signing a good team and trying to add to it, right? But Titans is a sick team. They have experience in multiple different metas. They have the synergy. They have the coordination. Their players are sick. It's hard for me to argue otherwise.
Let's talk about the Overwatch League love rectangle that's going on right now, and like the top 3 through 8. I don't really know where I would put them exactly, but Dallas gets 4-0'd by San Francisco, right? And then San Francisco loses to the Gladiators. Then the Fuel beat the Dynasty. Dynasty beat the Gladiators, right?
That's 4 corners. How is that a triangle?
Yeah, it's
It's a rectangle.
Listen
okay.
here, Yiska.
Yeah.
I know my geometry. I know you're gonna make like a United States education system joke. Yeah, listen what here. I was not the child left behind. Thank you very much.
Did you go to German boarding school?
I did. By the way, what's our German phrase for this week?
That was the last one that we just never neglected to use.
It was.
I can't remember. Something about a donkey
brain.
bridge.
Yeah, donkey bridge. Donkey brain.
Yeah.
I'm not even gonna try to pronounce it.
Eselsbrücke is basically something like a trick that you remember something by, and the more ridiculous it is, because donkey bridge sounds pretty ridiculous, right? Yeah. But the more ridiculous it is, the better it sticks in your mind.
No, we talked about this last week because there's
we
no
just never
horrors.
explained
There's
the
no
content.
horrors all horrors lay down.
And that's
according
why the
to Joe.
x-axis is horizontal.
Yeah, horizontal. Horrors lie down. That's how Joe.
Learning math.
ChrisTFer, that's how Joe remembers the word horizontal. Is that
horrors lay here? Okay. I was 12.
That's his
I'm sure there are other people that
whatever.
have done this. Eselsbrücker. Okay.
Sorry
for the German. I've absolutely butchered that. Apologies.
Okay.
All right. A 6 out of 10,
Yeah.
My GPA, baby.
That's not how GPA works on so many levels.
6 out of 10.
6 out of 10. I'll take it. On a scale of 1 to 4, 6 out of 10.
8 out of 10 doctors.
But I would love to get your thoughts, ChrisTFer, on this kind of the Gladiators, Shock, Fuel, Soul. There's just kind of these teams that are, I would say Philly has kind of distinguished themselves as above these teams, but I would say directly below them would be Gladiators, Fuel, Shock, Soul, and nobody can make any sense of it. I was wondering if you've got a take to help us make sense of how these teams are kind of jockeying for that whatever 3rd through 6th or 7th place.
Yeah, I would argue that the top of the Overwatch League right now is like ridiculously close. Like if I was to do a tier list, I would say there's like maybe 7 or 8 teams who all like straight up could beat each other on any given week. Like there's definitely no distinguished like top team that you look at and you think these are a level above everyone else. Unless Titans are, I don't know. We haven't scrimmed them because they arrived late. Maybe they're the new ones, but I don't know. I think that we are not necessarily above those teams you listed. I think if you were to ask me, I think like 7 or 8 teams like specifically could just beat anyone, and that's just the nature of the meta right now.
Do you think that would change if and hopefully when the meta changes? Do you think that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think over time as well, it'll get better as more teams get good at GOATs. I think what's going to happen in this meta is every team right now for week 1 understands that GOATs is the bread and butter of this meta, and that's what every team's spent most of the time doing. But what inevitably will happen is when certain teams figure out that they are weaker at GOATs than other teams, they're going to look to specialize on DPS comps, or maybe they do these like DPS GOATs comps with Sombra and stuff, and then like the variance is just going to get bigger and bigger, because the nature of GOATs is if you know the enemy team is a better GOATs team than you, it doesn't make sense just to go into a game and say, let's just match GOATs, right?
But by the way, if someone wants to pay me to lobby for
No, I don't. There's nothing I would pay you for, actually.
All right.
Next.
No, pay me to lobby for specific changes, just with Like, okay, so you pick a comp, for instance, you're Chengdu, you're playing Armeng, you want Hammond comms all the way. Like, just pay me. I'll try to talk to Jeff Kaplan and force these. Okay, jokes aside, it will be a little bit of a lottery, I feel like. And I also think this opens up interesting avenues towards providing balance feedback in order to almost, tamper a little bit with the competition. No, but seriously, like, there's a lot of power there, and I know there are feedback channels. It will be interesting who prevails in that regard, because we've seen how valuable it is to be the first in a certain meta and also stick with it for a longer period of time, right? So, like, I made the joke of, like, if a fool that persists in his folly becomes wise. That's just how it seemed to be, right?
It's interesting you say that, because I noticed one thing, like, on Twitter, like, for the past 6 months, how long Goats has been meta. It's NA players every day. We hate Goats, nerf Goats, please nerf Goats. And EU Twitter, no, it's fine. Like, this meta's coolio. Just keep it where it is, because it favors the NA players to go away from this meta, right? Yeah.
I mean, historically, we've seen that. Like, look at season 1 of Contenders for 2018. We saw, like, the Doomfist Sombra. We saw people trying to give different looks to these teams that were one-tricking Goats in NA. And EU, it was just a battle of, it was a gentleman's handshake. We're going to run Goats. You're going to run Goats. Let's see who the better man is. Or, person.
Yeah.
Great distinguishing language, by the way.
Hey,
that's
Good house. 2 points.
Reformed, baby. Reformed.
That's an element to esports that would be crazy as money or with the price stakes that we have now with these franchises, where competitive success really is very important towards your financial situation as well. It's like in football, nobody asks, like, okay, what kind of rules can we change so Ronaldo stays like the best till he's 40? That doesn't happen.
You mean soccer?
It might very well happen in. Yeah, I said football.
I was like, there's not a Ronaldo that plays in the NFL.
I don't think they play football in the NFL.
Listen here.
I mean, he might appear in one of your advertisements, which apparently is a national sport, which I realized upon watching the last Super Bowl.
You watched the last Super Bowl? There was a Ronaldo ad in the Super Bowl?
No, that wasn't. To turn some people to actual, sports.
Let's have a discussion about
3
football
billion
versus
people
football.
Care about, other than that little island. It's
not about how many people care about it. It's about how many nukes the hosting country has.
Actually, since I've come to America, that's the one word I refuse to budge on. Like, I'll say trash instead of, like, rubbish in England, but I'll never, ever, ever call football soccer. It won't happen. It's always football.
So what do you call them? Is it just American football? Are you a hand egg guy?
No,
like
American football, right?
All right. It is super tangential, but it is surprising to kind of, like, remember that, like, soccer is like a absolutely massive sport. Like,
It's
European
like
football is
4 times bigger
absolutely
than
incredibly
big. Like, so
it's
many.
crazy.
I believe, and nobody fact check me on this, but I believe that American football was actually originally discovered in the UK. Like, originally started in the UK, which makes it even more confusing.
Really?
It's probably just an adaptation of rugby, no?
I would imagine so. Yeah, they just, like, slapped armor on the guys and was like, all right, what if we just do this?
Yeah. Hit them wherever you want now.
Yeah. Which is interesting. Again, another
my
tangent.
Yeah.
CTE, not as big of a problem in rugby.
Because you have to tackle below the waist, right? So
You're not, like, just head down running headlong into people, ruining your brain and your life for the next, lifetime.
People have come to know Tactical Crouch as an amazing resource of knowledge when it comes to, competitive Overwatch.
Here.
But I think for the last, like, 3 minutes we failed you. And it's not actually me. It's not my fault this time. So
the question really is if you can get CTE from tactical crouching on someone's face.
What's CTE?
Like brain damage.
It's brain damage. I don't know what it stands for, but it's brain damage.
Okay.
I knew once, but then I got CTE.
at least not that brain. Let's talk about knee-jerk reactions. Sorry, knee-jerk reactions. I've been listening to too many of Yiska's German lessons. Knee-jerk reactions.
Said the Horstman.
Man of the woods. That is what I am. So knee-jerk reactions. Obviously, as week one of the season has come to a close, everybody wants to just freak the F out. I've got like four messages on Twitter, 2 death threats, and 2 are like, I told you so. I told you that this team sucks. I told you that this team is whatever. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. They're like, scroll up, bro. And I was like, I don't understand what you're saying right now. Let's talk about our own hilarious knee-jerk reactions. For me, number 1, knee-jerk reaction, London Spitfire, down at number 19 on my power rankings because they're 0-2.
Seems fair.
Seems about right. Seems about right. Yiska, yeah.
Here's my knee-jerk reaction. Putting Hurricane in would have netted better results than playing the main team.
That might be right.
I'm trying to interpret ChrisTFer's face.
Yeah, I coached British Hurricane for 3 weeks before I got the Philly gig, right? But we were never a GOATS team. Like, even in season 3,
That's
right?
true.
Like, Hurricane were maybe the EU team which wanted to do the least GOATs, I think, in total.
You always trying to move Haffy around, putting him on the Widow, putting him on the Sombra. Like, if there was a team to not put in the GOATS meta, I think it would be the Hurricane. I mean, but I still think they'd probably do better than London. To be fair, they'd probably still do better. I
really don't agree. Actually, that's maybe the knee-jerk reaction that I hate the most. This idea that every EU Contenders Trial Open Division team would destroy every Overwatch League team. Like, it's so wrong. Actually, wrong. It's so wrong.
Yeah, every is most definitely wrong, and also the fact that Hurricane plays more different comms would then open up the Overwatch League teams to flex onto DPS positions where they would just outmuscle them.
100%. I think maybe you could make an argument that if you could clone Season 2 Giganti or Season 2 Eagle Gaming and put them in this meta, I think they would still be in the top. They wouldn't be like by far and away. They would be in the pack with like the 7 or 8 teams I mentioned before. But I don't think that the Overwatch League level of GOATs is terrible like most people seem to think it is. I feel like we're gonna have a disagreement about this one.
Maybe I'm just confused.
I can't look.
That's the thing. That's the difference that I wanted to get into. That ChrisTFer is postulating that there's a difference between owl goats and contenders. But
so I feel like most people think that EU GOATs is optimal, and because Overwatch League, their style of GOATs is different. Okay, then it's worse, right? That's what people seem to react to. But like from playing at EU Contenders, from playing with Team UK to playing in Overwatch League, there's like stylistic differences in the way that teams play GOATs. I don't think one is inherently better than the other. I just think that it comes from the mindset that Overwatch League players have compared to European players. Like Overwatch League GOATs is like so much more focused around like positioning, like, okay, can we rotate this way, take the high ground, like put a Zoya on high ground, let's hold in this choke. Whereas EU, they don't care about that. Like, EU is pure efficiency. That's how EU plays GOATs. It's like, okay, on this map, how many different fights can we get? Why don't we just hold them in spawn, but then the cart doesn't move? It takes a minute off the clock. Let's fight them again here. To fight them in here again. I think that, so if I had to pick a style, I would go for EU. But I honestly think that the optimal way to play GOATs is somewhere in the middle, actually. I think there's stuff that Overwatch League teams do with GOATs that EU teams don't do, that I think if they were less arrogant about their own level of play, they could learn from and improve.
I think particularly what always stands out to me is that Overwatch League Zaryas seem to all think they're Spider-Man in almost way too many situations, where it's like, just from watching and then also talking to EU Contenders coaches, it seems to me that the Reinhardt is open so often and it's just not punished for these situations. Because, for instance, EU GOATs would then have the Zarya use personal bubble in order to take some pressure off the Reinhardt. And I can see, for instance, let's say a Hollywood situation, right, where it's like you have a lot of great high ground, you can farm, grab very quickly, play around that, even though the graphs are also pretty bad. I have to say, like, it's I wonder I probably agree that, for instance, on Hollywood, it makes sense. I wonder if the approach. I understand what you mean by saying there's the hybrid, because sometimes, yes, it seems to be that they almost don't care about map architecture in the specific points. It's almost like, okay, so this is a length. Let's cut that in 3 parts.
Yeah,
That's 3
100%.
fights. It doesn't matter if there's a high ground here or a high ground there. I understand that part, even though I think there's at least some sophistication in Gigante's play there. But yeah, I think in general there are pretty, to me, glaring holes in especially Reinhardt's vulnerabilities that also aren't really taken advantage of as
No,
often.
I agree with that. I think that there is a lot of Overwatch League teams which still don't fully understand like the strengths and weaknesses and the win conditions of goats. And I think that over time, like the more teams scrim Paris specifically, I think teams are going to like figure out. I can already see like we would scrim Paris, they would do a certain comp or a certain style on a map, and then over time, the next week scrimming other teams, more and more teams are like, okay, this is quite smart what they're doing. And I think that that's the evolution the Overwatch League will have eventually.
Would you say that Paris is more EU or owl goats?
Paris is, if you've got, this is the left and this is EU goats and this is Overwatch League goats, Paris is as far left as humanly possible. We scrimmed Paris for the first time, and it was like one of my favorite scrims ever, because every single swap, every single rotation, I knew they were going to do it. It was so like they just play like a Seita team does, like an EU team does. Like there is no differences. They play the exact way that you expect them to play, and they beat most teams with it.
Does it faze you at all when you hear that Paris lost 70% of their scrims against the higher EU teams?
The Paris players tell me that the 70% number is maybe higher than the truth.
I mean, that is also always the case. We know this. This is scrimmeth.
I don't know. Like, they're a new team that came together, and of course, when you're playing against established teams, like the scrim results don't go perfectly. From what it's worth, talking to Cruz, and my also personal opinion, if you played Gigante versus Paris, I think Paris would steamroll them right now. I don't think there's any logic to the point where Gigante could beat Paris, because you pick the best EU contenders players, you pick the coaches with the most fundamental knowledge of goats, you put them in an environment which is so useful to improve like an apartment gaming house type setup in the Overwatch League. I cannot see an argument for why Gigante would beat Paris. I just don't see it.
I think at this point this might still be the case, but yeah, I agree that eventually at least the trajectories are absolutely unequal. Like the way that these two teams likely improve is just the arch is way higher for or has to be for Paris, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that maybe EU as a region, I think, has this idea that if you have EU blood in your veins, you just fundamentally understand goats. Like when I was 1 year old, my first words were "Go goats, lol." Like that was my first words because I'm European. But I think the truth is there is like a handful of teams that really understand it. I think the Eagle Gaming core really understand it. I think any player that's ever played on a Seita team really understands it. I would like to argue that Team UK, we had a pretty good understanding of the meta. And I think the teams where these players have gone into the league and different teams, those teams have a really good opportunity to understand it. But I personally believe that like the EU contenders teams now that never had access to being coached by like Fefe or Seita or playing with Eagle Gaming or Gigante players don't understand goats at a higher level in Overwatch League at all. Just because the European, I don't think it makes a difference.
What is interesting though is that there seems to be some residual quality within the Gigante core, and I think a lot of it comes down to Davin, because once again, I hear this from sources. This is actually not from Gigante sources, but they are clapping EU right now.
Yeah,
it's not close.
I heard the same.
So
they also have Zappis and Zuppe, right, who are old NIP people. So they also have a really fundamental understanding of tank meta from the good old days. And I would also personally argue that like season 2 of this season of Contenders was when Goats was at its best, and it's when all the best players. But there was a lot of coaches and players that got taken from EU.
Yes.
People argue that we were undervalued and not enough EU players went to the league, but there was loads of EU players that went to the league. Maybe not as many as Korea, but the vast majority of Gigante got gutted. Like Angry Titans lost all their coaches. Eagle Gaming lost players and coaches. The vast majority of like the people with like fundamental Goats understanding are in the league, I think.
Yeah. with few exceptions, and I'm not sure if it isn't due to them turning down opportunities here and there. I heard that people who you would consider to be very good at least turned down academy trials, for instance. And I mean, currently the situation, it's quite clear that you actually have a big chance if you're, for instance, one of those Contenders EU players that is an academy player that is a two-way. This is actually your chance to, in season 1, to trigger that clause and just sit in the league for the rest of your contract length, right? So, yeah, it's an interesting situation there.
Yeah.
When you mentioned UK Overwatch, I thought it was actually kind of fitting that it at least draws some parallels to this OWL style. You mentioned that the OWL kind of GOAT style is very heavily positionally focused. And after talking to some of the players, after you guys had, played against them at the World Cup, a lot of people started to complain about Kib specifically and how aggressively he was positioned and how, it was very difficult to play against him. A lot of the main tanks were very frustrated specifically. I think Canada was very not happy with how they played against you guys, or there's just so many main tanks that were so frustrated dealing with Kib. Do you think when it goes back to UK and the World Cup team, do you think that was kind of the genesis of this Overwatch League style that is so heavily focused about positioning?
I think that had UK not shown how good GOATs can be at the World Cup, then I don't know how much GOATs would play in the Overwatch League right now. I think that's interesting. I think, ironically, if France had not picked any of the players they picked and just sent Eagle Gaming would have won the World Cup without dropping a single map. I think that... No, I promise you they would have. Team UK, we were good at GOATs, but we couldn't take maps off Eagle Gaming. They were on another level to what we played, quite considerably. Yeah. I think in that specific meta that we played in World Cup, I think we grasped really quickly that the stun shatter combo is more effective than a grab diva bomb combo. Mm-hmm. And the way you need to play it is you need to use your grab to force the portals out and farm shatter. But the shatter's the one that consistently wins you the fight. And obviously the current meta, that's it's the opposite impossible. Is maybe true now. Yeah. And I think that's one thing that we clicked that maybe other teams didn't quite understand. And I think if you don't understand that when you mirrors on GOATs, like sometimes USA or sometimes Korea did, and you aren't specifically saving your Zarya bubbles to stop that, then it's so just easy to just completely plow through, yeah?
One interesting variation that I've seen from Boston is that so they almost, they try grab bomb, but that's their first order of operation. But what they also do is they have Kelix hover over the opposing team, and then almost it worked very often. With perfect timing, he would drop down like fucking Batman, and then because the Reinhardt is still mid-air because of the graph, he would boop upwards and allow the fusions to shatter through, right? Mm-hmm. Is that something that can be reliably utilized?
It's interesting. The way that teams use Zarya ult within the ult economy is interesting. I think it's more intelligent to try and force support ults out rather than just take the 50-50. Let's grab combo into their support ults and let's see if we get a kill or not. But there is also ways to finesse the combo to make it consistent. The way you talked about, which a lot of teams will grab and they will hold their diva bomb for maybe 2 seconds. So they're the sucking of the grab runs out, and then your Lucio can boop, and then everything explodes, right? There's small intricacies that teams are doing, because in this current meta, how many kills you get with your grab diva bomb is a really, really significant factor in just snowballing.
And another style of GOATs that's at least I've kind of caught up on and tried to postulate on is this very Korean mentality about how you're supposed to use your support alts. You're seeing a lot of aggressive beat engage. You're seeing a lot of aggressive transes. Is that similar to how the old Bash Shatter used to function, where you're trying to you're asking the enemy team to match you with your trans or your beat, and then using your graviton to farm shatter and setting up a bomb?
So a lot of teams would originally shatter first, force the support ults, grab second, get a kill, and then hopefully also farm your shatter.
Right.
That's the optimal situation. For me personally, I was always an advocate, especially in previous meta, if you have both shatter and grab and you want to win the fight, you're not worried about necessarily ult economy. I think grabbing first and then shattering afterwards you should actually never lose that if you're even remotely good at the comp. And I think that's something like I preferred. Like I remember, so for Team UK, a big reason we got so good was Hip, who's now on Paris and was with Eagle. He was in all of our scrims and he was helping us a lot. And the guy understood goats like a genius. Like they were so smart. Eagle Gaming.
Wait,
So
that is so. He scrimmed with you guys. It's to be spiteful towards his own nation.
yeah, for not picking him. Exactly.
That is so dope.
But he taught every single player and coach in Team UK a lot about goats, and I think we owe a lot of our success. Like he actually deserves a lot of credit for. And one thing that he told was that sometimes, like if your Diva Bomb and your Zoyril were out of sync, a lot of teams would hold the grab until you get to Diva Bomb, right? But what Eagle Gamer would do a lot of times is they would just use the grab, farm the shatter, and win with it. And then if your ults are out of like, if they're not in sync, doesn't matter. You have the Diva Bomb and the grab. Let's combo. Like there's no reason not to. But like, don't waste your Zarya ult to waste 20% for the Diva Bomb, which is interesting. But that's like, what the second the shield and the bash changes, the entire meta of goats changed. Like the way you use your ult, the way you do everything changed. Like it was such a really significant change.
We came to this point talking about Kib, and I wondered, because he was obviously not playing, do you think Kib has the knowledge that he could impart on a team? Of course, language barrier is a problem here. And is Brig really in a position to carry, maybe not as much as Reinhardt, but would you play him in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, when Kib was on Team UK, the meta was Brig was like maybe the most significant part, and now it's one of the least significant, I would argue. I think that I have this theory with like certain teams in the Overwatch League where if their coaches are like really humble and they understand who understands goats, that teams should let certain players coach, right? So I think that on Dallas Fuel, if Aero and Jane and whoever their coaches are relatively humble, they should go to RCK and say, tell me everything you understand about goats. You coach the team, like give us the fundamentals. And I think Atlanta should do the same with Massa. And I think that if Guangzhou can get past the language barriers, I think doing the exact same for Kib would work. Because I think he does. I know Kib, he has a really good understanding of how to play goats. But it's very difficult for some coaches to step down and be like, oh, well, I'm just going to let this guy do my job for now. But I think it's like the optimal way to do it. That would how it would be.
Just give him little, like post-its under the table, like, and I meant to say this, and this, and Kib's salary is increased twice. What? Like, yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that Brig, in your opinion, is so undervalued, I'll say. What is your take on, or maybe you can completely disagree with me. I've noticed that some Brigitte players, namely for the Spark Bazzi, and I think EQO specifically, was a little bit over aggressive. Is there a plan there that I'm not necessarily understanding, or what kind of is going on there?
I mean, I think that Brig isn't as valuable as it once was, but I still think the hero is like incredibly important. And I think the way you use your stuns and the way, like, especially what's the difference between good Brigs and bad Brigs is their ability to E when they need to. Like the heal pack, I think that's the most significant part of it. That's maybe like it's not necessarily the highest skill, but it's what separates good Brigs and bad Brigs.
Sure. I mean, it's the same. I would kind of agree with the same thing with Zarya. It's like when and where you're using your resources. Why is there a thought process there? Exactly. What are you trying to kind of alleviate pressure off of? I think that's incredibly important.
Within our team specifically, Eco is able to control fights like really well on Brig. Like he's maybe the most vocal player on our team, and I think that his Brig is as good as anyone's in the league.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's kind of unfortunate that Brigs were able to make such a difference in the last meta. And now they're just another brick in the wall.
All right, that's been episode number 20 of Tactical Crouch. We're out of here. Just done. We're shutting it down. All right, we're not shutting it down. But that's a formal warning, Yiska.
Accepted. I deserve this.
Formal warning. And, if you want to be a co-host on Tactical Crouch.
Wow, looking for openings, boys.
Applications are now open. Send us your resume on Twitter. Keep it to 280 characters or less, though.
Real fast before we get off the aggro brig topic, because I do kind of want to get to the bottom of this. Is there a world where bubbling your brig is as important as bubbling your Rhine if they're playing aggressively?
Only if you're
And why would? Yeah, I don't know. You don't think so? Okay.
I think that what happens a lot is when the Rhine dies, your brig becomes your Rhine, right? So you start to use shields in the same way. But I think if your Rhine's alive, then you should be using it. Like, unless you're using it to save someone, then the Zarya shields need to go on the Rhine where possible.
I remember that distinct situation where I think it was King's Row, out of streets, Neptuno is on the wall, gets bubbled, and I'm just waiting for Sato to die. I'm like, okay, yeah, I know how this goes and good it is.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I think that if you go back a patch, if you waste a single Zarya bubble, even if the enemy doesn't have Shatter, your Rhine is dead. But now I think that even if you waste a Zarya bubble, I don't think it's a guarantee that you're Rhine dead. I think you step back and you just hold shield. I think you can survive way longer. I think that you can be more loose with your Zarya bubbles now if you're just using it for energy to bubble someone like Delucio in this example. I don't think it's as big a deal as it was that you waste one bubble, your Rhine's dead. I don't think that's how it works anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
So ideally, you could hide your brig, kind of play like the sneaky Rhine, like I have Shatter, I'm gonna hide in a corner, the team comes out, doesn't check the corner, you can put brig behind you. I think you guys did that on Nepal against Atlanta quite a bit, and that's kind of where I'm headed with the aggressive brig talk. I think Spark did this quite well on Nimbani to a mixed degree. I think Bazzi stayed in a little bit too long, but yeah, I think there is some merit there that you can put your brig a little bit off sides and bring them out because you can live a little bit longer without the Zarya bubble these days.
I think the very best teams in the league are still able to like semi-consistently do stone shatters, like if they see the moments, like with the correct angles and the correct speed. I think it's still a possible combo, and it's really effective if you can hide the brig, like when they're coming through the choke. But I think like if we don't see brig, everyone in that
everybody's
like, where's brig, because it's happened after getting hit by the combo enough. You're playing, right?
Yeah.
All right. I want to move forward a little bit. Let's move forward for a second. I want to talk a little bit about this next coming week, and the Philadelphia Fusion actually have a really big important match this week against the Dallas Fuel, and I want to know, no Dallas Fuel coaches or players are listening, what's your strategy? No, I'm just kidding. But I want to talk. I mean, what can you tell us about this upcoming match as far as what you see maybe as the Fuel's strength? And I mean, obviously I want to hear if you think you're gonna win, ChrisTFer.
To be honest with you, I think we're in big trouble. A respected coach of mine went on stream and he told us that our goats wasn't just bad, it was horrible. It was something similar to a car wreck and how it's not even worth saving. So I think based on these comments, I don't think we stand a chance really against Dallas Fuel, considering how good they are. Presumably.
I don't know, man. I saw some grabs out of Dallas that were not pretty. I'm just saying.
No, I'm not sure if his statement actually included or excluded Dallas Fuel themselves.
He was talking specifically about Spitfire versus Fusion. That's what he was talking about.
That's true. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. He did the thing where he was incredibly disappointed with the level of goats play. So we'll focus on it. Otherwise, we just won't stand a chance, presumably.
Oh my god!
I like this banter. I you know what, ChrisTFer? I think more European talent needs to come in because you and Cruz have brought a level of banter and shit talkery that this league is needed. This is what we need.
Good Overwatch.
You talk good Overwatch. Yeah. It's nice.
So I don't even know where to go. Joe, all right.
Yes.
I mean, obviously ChrisTFer is right here. So you gotta, I don't know, play it cool or whatever. Otherwise, he'll never come on the show again.
Mm-hmm.
But give it, regardless of that fact, Fuel versus Fusion. This is supposedly a big one. And again, Fuel beat the Dynasty, but they get 4-0'd by the Shock here. Where are you landing on this one?
I really think that whole love rectangle is very much playing on the theme of the show about styles and how styles how they are or are not compatible with one another. I think Philadelphia is very much I wouldn't say they are lacking style or color, but they don't need to be as colorful, right? I don't think they need to be as creative. I don't think you need to throw in the Sombra, even though we've seen Poco on it. Dallas, on the other hand, they seem to find a lot of success, very much the same way as London did. I think Philadelphia has a very fundamental understanding of goats, is a little rough around the edges at times, for sure. What team doesn't have problems, right? Dallas, on the other hand, I think they need to be a little bit more creative. I think their ultimate usage is a little bit lacking. I think, maybe there was some nerves last night. I don't know. But, my prediction game has been looking a little rough, and I don't have the leisure to vote Dallas. So this is pretty much Philly. I'd say like 65-70%.
Dang, that's
no bias.
That's a generous spread. That's usually that for Joe. That's like a 51-49 lead up there. Like it's his name is Joe Hedge Your Bets Franco. Yeah. He doesn't really say things.
No jokes aside, humor, put in a corner. I do think Philadelphia has the better goats. I think that Dallas has to finagle with their roster a little bit more than Philly does. I will say there have been improvements. I thought against London, Sato's Winston looked a little shaky, but the Rhine seemed to play out against Atlanta. He seemed to be a lot more comfortable on the Winston. I think this is pretty safe. I think this is a safe bet to say Philly. Again, ChrisTFer, if you were here, I'd say the same thing.
That's an interesting point, by the way, which is I've talked to a bunch of analysts, and they all said that they would probably expect Fraggy to hard carry in this meta. Now, at the same time, you also want your main tank to not be the flexible component of your composition, because if you go through all the successful OWL teams, they had this one, player that sticks with the core, develops synergy. It's quite important. So I understand from that standpoint, for instance, taking a couple of percentages off now and just applying them to the trajectory of the season. Do you? Of course, this is probably a weird coaching territory, ChrisTFer, but is there something to that theory in terms of Sato and Fraggy?
I think that this is an issue that's perhaps more complex than I should talk about in a podcast. I think that the core of this team went through a lot last season, wins, losses, and I think that the core that played playoffs created like a really unique bond with each other based on the success they ended up having. And I think that it was difficult for us at times to pick a roster that just wasn't those 6 players, considering like how well they now work together. I also think that from a purely tactical point of view, we are actually we're quite reliant on our Winston Goats at times. I think our Winston Goats is as good as anyone's in the league. And I think that the maps where we win, we often get a very good head start by a good hold with a Winston Goats or something, for example. And I think that we don't necessarily want to change that.
I don't think you should. I think specifically against London, I think Rialto was just a masterclass at how good Sato can be at and how tactical you guys are at, specifically, each and every point, kind of in that EU style, breaking it down. This is the rotational path. If we just cut them here, if they match us on Winston, we do this. It seemed very formulaic, and London looked completely lost. And I go back to what I said about London being slow to adapt. They didn't know what to do.
And for what it's worth, in the series yesterday against Atlanta, Sada was our best player by far, and his run was absolutely excellent yesterday.
Yeah.
Really, really good. So.
It was big.
Joe, is this the position where I point out the Baroy Sato story?
Oh, Dark Mirror? I was going to write an article on it, but he can't ever back me up on exactly what he told me. But yeah, you can tell the story.
Okay, so last season, when Baroy was looking into stats and doing some consulting, he mentioned that there was a Winston play and he only used Korean lettering. So
I can tell you what that lettering was. Continue though.
Okay. So he kept for weeks. He kept raving on, "Oh, he's so good, and nobody knows him." And the story went on, and of course, Sato was unable to play. But then eventually, I think in stage 4 or something, as late as that, maybe even playoffs, we found out that this Winston that had outstanding stats and also I think on Ryan as well, was actually Sato. He was actually a massive statistical outlier that looked to be a great talent within the scene that wasn't really that discovered.
Yeah, when Seita was first picked up for Philadelphia a year ago, I was obviously still friends with Hayes and Kirby, and they
Sure.
told me that they thought Seita was the best Winston they'd ever seen. And I will say that when I watched him scrim, I was a Winston player, but someone who told me just like Primal Rage blows my mind. Like, I don't understand how you have that much control over weight. Like, they stand no chance. If you start struggling, he puts you where he wants you. Like, there's nothing you can do against it. It's crazy.
One of the names that I was fed information of when the Korean characters translate into the word soap.
Soap?
Soap. That was his handle on the Korean ladder, at least one of many. Some people attribute him to the Dark Miro account. I don't know if that was in Korean Hangul, but he has one account called Soap.
Makes sense because he made Miro look washed.
It's true. That he did. There's a lot of puns you can make there.
That was a good one, though.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. We don't have to cancel the show on that one. One for one.
Can I have my spot back on this podcast now, please?
I mean, no, not at all. But you don't get kicked off for that one. So, kudos to you. Let's talk about this next matchup, though. This one's going to be pretty interesting. Vancouver versus Shock. ChrisTFer, you don't have any skin in the game here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you expect to see out of this match.
It'll be very interesting. So I said before we hadn't scrimmed Vancouver a single time due to the nature that they came so late to the league, right? We have scrimmed Shark. I only saw highlights of Vancouver's game, but from what I saw, they were clean, like really clean. And I think that this will be a really, really good test for them. Because to be fair, I think Shanghai are way underrated. I actually think they're pretty decent. And I think they had a rough stage one, but Vancouver bodied them, right? So I don't know. If Titans win convincingly, I think that it's maybe fair to put them at number 1 in the league.
I think it'll be a testament to Krusty and the coaching staff on how quickly they can take both Smurf and Super and kind of dial them back a little bit. It seemed like Dallas was abusing their front line a little bit too often, and it was with 2 different main tanks. So I'll be interested to see how quickly they can reel them back in, because it feels like when they won versus Dallas and not the Gladiators seemed to punish them. When they beat Dallas, it seemed like it was on the back of that aggression, playing very high tempo, playing, to their rhythm, and they weren't being punished for it as much. And Dallas kind of broke down. There was, some miscommunication, it looked like, through the play. But Vancouver, like you said, on the other hand, looks very clean. If they can, reel them back in, I think it is going to be very close. But that's going to be the kind of theme there is what does the Shock front line look like coming into this match?
It's definitely the best fixture of next week. It's definitely
sure, of course, yeah.
The best game to watch.
That's the one thing why I'm not at all concerned for Shock yet with that loss against Gladiators, because to me, just look at it from Krusty's perspective, right? Sure. You have 2 equally skilled tanks, likely. You also have to sort of keep mind of how the comms work in terms of language and everything. Now you have a situation where a lot of players are banned still, or suspended, where some of them are not of age. The meta is not that well known. It's still stage 1. You can still turn it around. This is more like it looks to me to be a selection process of, okay, who can bring it on stage? Who is the main tank we will focus on for the rest of the season? Who wins this duel? And let's take some losses. Yeah. Even though I don't think they expected that to happen.
Sure. It's one of the most interesting things in Overwatch, the way that teams utilize their roster. Like Atlanta, for example, they gave every single player playtime, and it actually hard tilted me. I actually was so tilted because on the poll they subbed out their D.Va player. So in the coaching room, we were like, okay, they're going to play triple DPS here. So we started comps in the poll to count the triple DPS, but they subbed their off tank out to play goats fully, and I couldn't understand it. But my guess is they just rotate playtime, and as the standings go on, as playoffs get nearer, teams are going to stop rotating as many, and teams are going to find a core. What's interesting is I think if you looked at the grand final playoff last year, the 6 teams, I think New York were the only team that played over 7 players. Like I think almost all of the teams stuck to like 7 or 8 players. Like even with the ones bigger rosters, they just stuck the same people. And I think it's also interesting that it seems that most of the teams that were in the grand final playoffs last year are now rotating their players left. Like how many times in NYXL's games did they rotate players? Like maybe one DPS out here and there. London, I think one DPS here and there. Like we didn't make any changes the whole week. So it's really interesting to see the two like philosophies teams have as far as their rosters.
You can see how averse to this strategy of switching everyone out ChrisTFer already was, and how indoctrinated you already are to Philly, because you obviously would never do that. Rip Joe Meister.
Hey man, Snilla came in. He had some clutch plays, but again, it's 1 or 2 people here or there that
I mean, last season Philly was changing rosters every week, right? And I think that.
Yeah.
Well, part due in part because they kind of had to, right?
Yeah, there
was sat
so
for 30
many
games,
right?
Yeah.
But I think that one thing, like internally, they've realized that maybe that's not the optimal way to be consistent across a season.
Yep. And again, I think that's something that Shock is going to have to face as well with, their massive DPS line. I penned them as being a very London-esque team where they're going to whittle down the roster little by little. They might not completely just let go and jettison half of the roster, but you're going to see, like ChrisTFer said, a core built. And again, last match of next week, and we see Violet come back. So, maybe I'm sleeping on them a little bit much. I want to see what Violet does with this roster. I've heard very, very good things.
He's very good. He's very good.
That is the biggest thing where I can't believe how people are flipping out about Shock doing poorly when that is one of the biggest upgrades a team will receive through eligibility of their players that is going to come this season. Like the upgrade from Sleepy to Violet to me seems to be very severe. And also Zen is still fairly
super important.
So it's I expect them to be a very different team when he comes in.
I think if Shock teams like Shock can stay in the running for playoffs at the end of the stage whilst rotating players out, then their upswing once they get to the last 2 or 3 weeks, and they just focus on the core. Because in GOATs, like you really don't need to sub players out for different hero pools, right? It's really not important at all. So once teams like Shock get their best 6 and play their best 6, their upswing could be huge, like really significant. The question is, they have so many superstars on that team. Like, how many of them can handle being benched?
Yeah.
Like,
Tail of a dragon.
Struggles happen?
I don't want to be a tail of a dragon, man. I'm not interested.
I want to breathe the fire.
Pass. What is it?
True.
Tail of the dragon, head of a snake? Right? Was
Something
that what
like
it was?
that.
Yeah, something like that. I'm the same way. That's really... Let's talk about this last one, though. There's one more match I want to highlight this week, and that's going to be Paris Eternal. God, fix your logo. And the LA Gladiators here. Going to be an interesting one. We talked about... Oh, my God, I'm going to sneeze. We talked about the Gladiators...
That's a Go XLR promotional right there.
No, that was
hashtag ad.
That's why you have a cough button whenever you're hosting. Wow, that was intense. The Paris Eternal versus the LA Gladiators. Gladiators got off to, I don't want to say a rocky start, because I don't think that's fair to them, but they did.
They bounced back, man.
They lost to Soul Dynasty 3-1, and then they come back and they beat the Shock 3-2. So this is going to be kind of a big guess, as Paris is kind of seen as maybe the best team at GOATs in Overwatch right now. Like they at least what I'm hearing is that they're kind of the team to beat. But more than anything, they seem to be the gatekeepers. If I were going to say, if there's a gatekeeper to whatever, top 3, top 4, I would say, defeating Paris Eternal have to be part of that. You can't be in the top 3 or top 4 if you lose to Paris. And so, despite Yiska just shooting me down, just let me ask a question.
No. What I'm saying is, I wanted to make the joke that, like, you can't take what Gladiators did too seriously yet. He's just 17, dude. He's just 17. He's just a kid. You know what Depay kept repeating when we talked about Decay. Yeah. I think that the roster still is very good, and also it's not like they threw it's not like shock through against them. I think it was always going to be a very competitive match.
I think with Paris specifically, out of all of the teams in like top 8, as I called it, they might be the most consistent. And I think that they're the team that's going to, if you beat them, you have to outplay them. They're never going to underperform. Like their team, their swap system is very clear. They're like, their identity as a team, their style of play is so consistent. And it's like, they know, you know what they're going to do. They know what they're going to do. So I expect in the big games, I actually think they'll do really well.
You think they're gonna win?
I do, yeah.
I am a little bit.
I hope that us and Paris are 6-0 by the time we meet at the last day of stage 1. That's what I want.
That'll be a fun one for sure.
That would be good.
I am still a little. I do think Paris is going to win, but I just don't know to what degree. Gladiators is a weird bunch. I think they're good, but the level up that they had, the kind of scouting that they did, I don't know exactly what happened again versus Shock there, if it was Shock underperforming, but they looked to be pretty good. I still think this is pretty safe bet on Paris, but I want to see exactly what Gladiators turn out on that on February 23rd.
You were pretty high on Paris just now and saying like you hope that they go 6-0, right? Part of that has to be from their coaching staff experience, and of course Seita like being sort of like the GOAT's whisperer. Could you explain to viewers that don't quite understand the legend of Seita, who has, like sat in his lobbies and
It's unbelievable. He's literally a legend. Like I'm maybe the biggest Seita fan in human history, and I get so much shit off my team. I get bullied for it because I'm always talking about how much I love the guy, even though I've never played in a team with him or anything like that. Like he is extremely, extremely, extremely disciplined. Like I remember there was a story that maybe 2 years ago when he was in NIP, he single-handedly made EU start arriving on time to scrims because NIP was so far above every single team in Europe at the time. What Seita would do is, if you did not show up to scrims on time, he would just blacklist you because he didn't care, right? So every single team just would start to be like on time. If you had an NIP scrim, you were there 5 minutes early. You didn't want to risk it. And eventually, like the discipline came up. I think that he has maybe shaped the meta of Overwatch more than any human being in Overwatch history. I think that the way that NIP played tanks, the reason Europe is so tank favored is because his team was so good at GOATs that you played against him, you lost, and you say, okay, we just have to do the same thing. And it was the same on NIP, it was the same on old Giganti, it was the same on new Giganti, it's probably the same on new Giganti. Like every Seita team, like they were so good at what they did that teams in Europe were just like, oh, we just got to copy it, right? I think he's a legend, actually.
Yeah.
He's nuts.
And he's such a mystery as well.
Yes.
It's great.
Mystery. That's what's so great about him.
Enigma.
Apparently, ChrisTFer hasn't heard of KickedTripod dive, but besides that, yeah.
I've thought about writing an article about Seita. It would be called The Legend of Seita. And then I would talk about how I saw him at Takeover 1 and didn't realize I saw a ghost. I couldn't have known at the time, but this was a rare sighting. I saw the unicorn.
Was he definitely there?
He was there, yeah.
Oh, okay, that surprised me, actually.
Yeah.
I heard that he only does Finnish lands. I heard that's like, as far as you see, but I didn't know.
I'm pretty sure he was there, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. You should write about him. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of good stories people have about him.
Yeah.
When we first scrimmed NIP back in the day, like his team was so dominant that he didn't let spectators have global spectate. He thought they'll learn too much from us compared to what we learn from them. So he just locked the coaches to only spectating your team's POV, so they couldn't get anything from it. And it was only once triple tank meta died, and they tried to play like triple DPS dive, which they were not good at all. He's like, okay, we actually do need to have global spectate now. We need to learn from other teams. But for the first month we'd scrim them, no, you could do it. My favorite story about I think that NIP as a team was so far and away the best team in the world in triple tank meta 2 years ago, but nobody knows it because there was no tournaments. I remember I played for a team called the Chavs, and we were like a tank specialist team as well.
Chavs.
We were getting really
the Chavs
good.
are the best.
And we were starting to beat like all these like Melty, we were starting to beat Dignitas, and we were like, okay, we're really good. And we got our first ever scrim versus NIP, and we were really excited for it. And we got absolutely destroyed. I think we won one map, we lost 5, it wasn't close. And we were sat there like, they're never going to scrim us again. We just wasted our biggest opportunity. And Seita messaged me that same day, let's book more scrims. You were the closest any team's played us in weeks.
Wow.
And we got slapped. That's how good his team was back in the day.
Jesus.
Yeah, I remember talking to some of the OG NIP members and, kind of postulating questions to them, if you guys ended up going to Apex, how good would you do? And it's the same story regurgitated.
They would have won. 100% they would have won.
They think they would have won. Their style was different, but they're pretty confident that they would have just smashed everybody. Pretty crazy. Europe and GOATs go way back. Way
That's
back.
where it all started. That's where all of EU's dominance and how good we are at the GOATs comps in general, it all comes from NIP. Every single bit of it.
I just don't want to have a history book just to understand GOATs.
You don't need a history book. I will plug a very famous article written by the one and the only Sideshow Overwatch. Good old Sideshow actually has a very brief, well, I guess it's not brief. It's actually like a 3-part series on the history of NIP and kind of talking about their rise in EU. And I think it does a nice job of kind of teaching us about pre-Overwatch League eras and some of the teams that have kind of seriously impacted the way that we view the game. I think that they were definitely ahead of their time, and Sideshow encapsulates that very well.
Planned.
So, plugged.
Planned. Let's get out of here. We're over time already. We're taking way too much. If the Fusion lose this week, it's because we took the extra.
We're
10
holding
minutes.
up ChrisTFer on scrims, man.
Yeah, we held him up. So you can thank Tactical Crouch. If the Fusion loses this week, you can't blame ChrisTFer because it's our fault. Let's go ahead and get out of here. I mean, so number one, Yiska, let's talk about this really quick, dude. Like, you need to sleep. I saw you had the apparatus on you earlier, but you're like writing articles every 4 or 5 times a week, it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of really good ones. What was I keep thinking of every time I read the article, it puts me, the beginning of Aladdin where it's the guys selling you all the stuff. It was the Scrimbuck Stock Exchange. That's what it is.
Yeah.
There it is. It's the guy at the beginning of Aladdin, right, where he's selling you all the stuff. It's probably my favorite, maybe my favorite Overwatch article I've ever read. And I've read all of Joe's articles.
Thanks.
So, I'm just saying, Joe, step it up a little bit.
It is what it is. It is what it is. Stylistic differences. He's very, very colorful in the way that he writes. I'm very bland, and
that's not true. That is not true. That's not it at all. But it was just like a really, I learned a lot.
It is very good,
and it kept me really entertained the whole time. I maybe didn't learn as much as I could have. Yiska, I don't know.
What do you mean? That article is almost 100% accurate.
Something about that German, that German sense of humor maybe was lost on me a little bit.
Oh. Also, people still didn't find all the references.
No, there's some hidden gems that I'm still trying to understand. So yeah, if you're a super sleuth and want to be Detective Jones, get into the Scrimbucks Stock Exchange and start doing some analysis. You might find some nice little hints. But
it was amazing, Yiska. Keep up the awesome work. Joe, you put out some gems as well, honestly. So
thank you, buddy. Well,
I don't want you to feel like just because Yiska had one good article out of 80 this last week that you are diminished as a journalist.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. You know what, ChrisTFer? You started 0-2, so you know what? Kudos to you, buddy. You did it.
Started 0-2?
2-0. Whatever.
Wow.
It was the right numbers.
I mean, wow. Just
big wow. Yeah, lots of wows.
Just not the best number recognition.
Nope.
What did you accomplish this week?
Me?
Yeah.
He's been doing
Bro, you're looking at it. You're looking at what I've accomplished this week. This is the only thing I wake up for. Is Tactical Crouch. I just don't want to disappoint Yiska and Joe. That's all it is. I don't want to disappoint you guys. So that's what this is. ChrisTFer, it's not about me. I want to hear about you. So what do you got coming up? Like, what are you working on for the Philadelphia fans out there? What do you want to say to them? Give us it all. Give us your sign off. Go.
Thank you for the support. You know, we'll keep bringing it to map 5. We'll keep making it interesting, but we won't lose.
Won't lose. I like that. I like that. All right. There you have it. Go follow ChrisTFer at ChrisTFer. It's spelled weird, especially with the capitalizations. I'm so glad we use all caps for the branding for this show.
Do you want to know why?
I mean, it phonetically makes sense, but I'm guessing I have no idea. I
used to play a hero called Twisted Fate in League of Legends, so I thought my name was extremely clever at the time.
Oh.
But it doesn't necessarily transfer so well to Overwatch.
For the longest time, I didn't understand the phonetic writing of it, so I always thought it stood for Chris Team Fighter.
There's a lot. People used to think I played Team Fortress.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. It was Team Fortress.
I
Twisted
I just
Fate.
thought it was like
not
it was
pegged
just
you.
an emphasis on like ChrisTFer.
It's supposed to be pronounced ChrisTFer technically, but I think ChrisTFer works better.
Yeah, sorry, I'm never gonna call you ChrisTFer.
No one ever
Just
does.
kidding, just kidding. Yeah, should have asked that before the show. It was. Yeah, I thought it was so obvious, and here we've been calling you the wrong thing the whole time. All right, well, let's go ahead and get out of here. ChrisTFer, thank you so much for being on the show. Follow Tactical Crouch everywhere. Just search for Tactical Crouch, Overwatch League Daily, at OWL Daily Show on Twitter. I don't know. We might just change that. I don't know. We'll figure it out. Make sure to go follow Joe and Yiska at Volamel and at Yiska out. Follow ChrisTFer at ChrisTFerow on Twitter. Make sure to follow him. Cheer on the Philadelphia Fusion. They don't need you, but they want you. They want you to be cheering for them. So we're going to go ahead and get out of here. Thanks again, guys, for being here. Enjoy. I hope you enjoyed episode 20, especially once we got ChrisTFer's microphone working. I should have known that in the pre-show, right? Like I should have just known. Like, why does he have the microphone flipped down if he's using like a Yeti on the counter? It turns out he wasn't using a Yeti on the counter. All right. We're out of here. Chat, you're the best. Way to behave this week. Good job. Big Goose. Keep being you, man. All right. We're out of here. Go. Thanks for tuning in again. See you guys next week. All right, stream's still live.